Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Welcome to Labor Vision, a production of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. I'm your host, Erica Hammond, and joined with me today from the Rhode Island AFl-CIO, our President, George Nee, and Secretary Treasurer, Maureen Martin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have a long segment today, so let's get started right away. Let's start with this year. So, some labor-positive legislation that passed this year in the State House. Do you want to start us off, George?
Yeah, we actually had a very good year this year. There's been an issue that has been problematic for municipal employees and teachers for many years where certain communities, when contracts expired, would implement their last offer without having any recourse on the part of the union. So we've been advocating for what we call a continuing contract of the labor agreement when it expires. That legislation passed this year in both the House and the Senate and was signed by Governor Raimondo.
Great.
Right now, some of the cities and towns formed an organization to have a court suit against it. They're essentially suing the state of Rhode Island on this issue, but we're very hopeful that it will not go anywhere, and we finally have some economic justice. This was essentially the precedent and the law of the land for about 25 years until certain communities, specifically East Providence, tried to essentially say that it didn't work, and they created a lot of chaos in that situation. So this was a top priority and affects all of the municipal workers and the teachers' unions.
That's great.
So, you know, I can testify personally to, that's the way it was. That I know there's a lot of angsting going on about how this is a whole new thing, we've never done this. But from my work as a state employee and as a representative of state employees in the 70s, somewhat in the 80s, and all of the 90s, it was the way it was. It was we worked under the old contract, and it continued sometimes for a couple of years. And everything would just sort of stay still. Unfortunately, that meant that employees did not receive any raises. Maybe that's what is different.
Okay.
But I think what also is important for people to understand is that public sector workers do not have the right to strike. So in the private sector, if a contract expires and people in the union or the union members are dissatisfied with it, and the company tries to implement the last offer, the union members can go on strike. In the public sector, you can't. So the leverage, in our opinion, was all with the employer or community, in this case the municipality. And, you know, to be fair, 95% of the time it was not an issue. It was just when someone decided that they had the upper hand and they wanted to implement that upper hand that this protection is now needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this firsthand with, I live in Warwick, so yes. I saw it firsthand with the Warwick teachers.
Absolutely.
Unable to operate with a continuing contract, before this passed.
Right.
So this is critical. All right, what about the janis bill? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, unfortunately, the United States Supreme Court ruled a year and a half ago in the janis decision. Essentially what it was, or what it now says, is that there is a national right to work law for all public sector employees. So what that means is that in the past, if you did not want to join the union, which you had a right not to do, you had to pay what's called an agency fee or a fair share fee, and you had to pay money to the union, not exactly equal to the dues, but because you were covered under the collective bargaining agreement and got all the rights and benefits and advantages of that collective bargaining agreement, you had to pay for that representation. The Janus decisions under a free speech doctrine basically said, no, you don't have to. You can be what we refer to as a free rider. So you can get all the advantages of the collective bargaining agreement and you don't have to pay dues.
Right.
So we were very concerned about this, and we lost the Supreme Court decision. So legislation was introduced and passed in Rhode Island this year, and again signed by the governor, which basically said that the union will have an ability to meet with the people when they became new employees to explain what a union is all about. They'll be able to get updated information on a regular basis as to when the new employees come to work and communicate with them. And also in situations where the union will be allowed to charge somebody legal fees if they wish to avail themselves of union representation and they haven't been paying. So essentially, if you have an arbitration case, someone was terminated, in the past, you would go to the union would provide you with free legal representation. If you choose not to be a member now and you want representation, you're going to have to pay for it.
Right.
So that's an important right that the unions now have with their employees. Try to think about it in terms of you live in a city or town. You don't like your mayor or you don't like what the city council's doing, but you say, hey, guess what? I'm going to get all the advantages of living in the city and town. I'm going to get the trash service. I'm going to go to have my kids go to schools, have fire, police, recreation, safety, all that. But I'm not going to pay taxes. So you put the burden on everybody else.
Yeah.
So you're really a free rider. So far, it has not had much of an impact on the labor movement, but we were concerned about it, and we want to make sure that we have as much opportunity to meet with people as warranted going forward.
If for no other reason, we need to protect our members who are paying. So it just wouldn't be fair for them to have to pay for people who have decided to just walk away or get the benefits anyway.
Absolutely. Now, a few months ago, on another note, we had Senator Frank Lombardi we had Senator Frank Lombardi and Paul Valletta from the Rhode Island Firefighters Association talking about the firefighters' overtime bill. Can you guys speak a little bit on this bill that passed recently?
Again, that was a very important piece of legislation. A number of cities and towns were creating some crazy shift schedules. And as a result of that, people were required to work in a number of hours such that if you average it out, they weren't even getting paid the minimum wage in some cases for those extra hours. So what the firefighters proposed is to say, if you work over 42 hours in a week, you have to be paid overtime. Now, in the private sector, and in a lot of other public sector jobs, there are provisions to say you should get overtime, time and a half after 40 hours. So in this case, it's 42 hours, and that, we believe, will prevent a lot of the cities and towns from creating these kind of crazy shifts that become the soup of the day, and everybody just, thinks that this is going to be a magic solution. These people work hard, they put their lives on the line, they risk their lives every day, and it doesn't seem to be unfair that they should be provided an opportunity to get, a just overtime pay.
And the shifts that they had proposed and instituted in some cities and towns were wrong for so many other reasons, people working for so many hours straight. But this was sort of like tipped us over the edge. I think the firefighters, who, as George says, work hard on our behalf every day, all day, or we like to call them, on my Twitter feed, I call them everyday heroes.
Absolutely.
And they're there when, as we say, everybody else is running out of the building, they're running in the building, and then they don't get decent wages. So.
I think, too, one of the most important things is this issue, it's not it becomes an occupational health and safety issue, right?
Sure,
Because
absolutely.
they
Right.
work so many hours in their shift, and then say someone calls out or isn't able to come in, which happens often in other sectors or other occupations, and they have to stay,
Yeah.
right?
You know, sometimes the purpose of providing overtime pay is so that people don't get overtime. A lot of times people don't want the overtime because it is a health and safety issue. If you're on duty
Right.
for 40, 50 hours, you get tired,
Yeah.
and the stress level goes up.
Yeah, so many occupations have laws against working over so many
Right,
hours.
right.
And here we have these folks coming in who do kind of a life and death, make life and death decisions.
I mean, it makes sense being compensated for the work that they're doing.
Sure,
Right.
If
absolutely.
nothing else.
All right. What about there are many budget items that passed as well. Can you talk about some of those?
Well, the two primary budget in last year's budget,
Last year.
a big effort on the labor movement is representation in community or in programs that represent provide services to the developmentally disabled community.
Right.
And provided by direct service providers. We formed a coalition of 4 different unions, UNAP, United Nurses and Allied Professionals, the RIFT, the SEIU, and the machinists. And they represent people in a lot of these programs. The direct service providers are the people who are providing these services every single day. The state made some significant cuts in these programs years ago, and we're still trying to catch up. Last year, I want to give a tremendous amount of credit to Senator Lou DePalma and Representative Evan Shanley, who put in legislation to have a significant increase in the pay rates for these people through the state reimbursement system. At the end of the day, ended up getting a 91-cent increase provided effective, I think it was
October.
in October of this year.
October.
So
Yeah.
that was a big victory. And Maureen, as someone who had done this work before, I think has a real firsthand knowledge of how important this work
I
is.
just recently talked to someone who represents some of these folks still. They said that was the hugest big bump in pay that they had seen in decades in October, and they were thrilled about it. But I worked in the DD field for years and represented folks, and the work is physically and mentally and emotionally huge.
Right.
It's just like such a burden, and to think that some of these people get paid barely minimum wage after years of working there.
Right.
So this was just a great bump for them, and for people in general, for the people who live in these facilities too. Because as we know, if you have good trained, well-paid people, providing services, it's just works better.
Absolutely. I volunteered with the Trudeau Center for years, so many of my good friends work as direct service providers, and the number of folks that turned out in favor of this legislation because they understand how critical it is. I saw so many of our Special Olympic athletes that get why this is so important because of the amazing work that these individuals do for them and how they've helped them throughout their lives. The individuals who are doing this work, at least in my opinion and from what I've seen, is they're doing it because they love it.
Yeah.
And they're
That's
sticking
right.
around because they love it.
Yeah.
They're not sticking around because it's putting the food on the table.
Yeah.
But this is a huge step in the right direction for them.
Tell me that
right?
story again about people who are working in these facilities and going to school.
Right. A few friends of mine who work as direct service providers were going to school and working they had been working there for years, like through high school, through part of college, and it was just not enough money to be able to be paying for school, having to pay for school and being in debt from paying for school, but then having to drop out without a degree because they couldn't make car payments, put food on the table, right?
Sure.
It's crazy.
So kudos to the governor for putting it in her budget, and then for the General Assembly for upping the amount.
Yeah.
So that was really a great boost for them.
And another important line item was the tax increase, the film tax increase.
Film tax credit,
right?
which
Film tax.
provides tremendous opportunities for particularly members of the Teamsters Union and the Stagehands Union, and has been a subject of some controversy, but some of the research has shown that this really is a very important benefit for Rhode Islanders. It brings in a lot more money than what we put out in terms of the tax credits, and this was expanded this year, both in terms of its scope and also the money. So that was a real positive.
Right.
But we did have a big setback. You were going to ask me about that.
About the film taxing?
No, about the rest of the 2019 legislative
The
session.
unfinished business,
The
right?
unfinished business.
So do you want to speak on some of that? Some of the labor positive legislation that just didn't
make
fall
the
through.
cut.
Right.
Still upset about this.
Absolutely.
Furious, actually. Our minimum wage last year was $10.50. Our minimum wage in January of this year is going to be $10.50. The governor, to her credit, put in her budget an increase from $10.50 to $11.10. Looked like that was running into trouble. The Senate, under Senator Ruggiero's leadership, passed almost unanimously, I believe, an increase in the minimum wage to go from $10.50 to $11.50 on January 1st. No action by the House. They did not. They took it out of the governor's budget. So when the final budget was proposed, that was eliminated, and they took no action on the Senate bill.
Right.
So here we are going into January 1st of 2020. Our minimum wage will be at $10.50, and the Massachusetts minimum wage will be $12.75.
Yep.
$2.25 difference for a 40-hour employee, $90 a week.
Yeah,
Doing the same work, working for the same kind of companies, whether it's the fast food chains, the big retail stores, because a lot of the people work in those kind of industries.
It's a significant raise.
$2.25, and we are still extremely upset with the leadership of the House for making that decision.
It's a huge percentage.
And leaving people in economic poverty.
If you think about what $10.50 comes out to, under $20,000 a year, which is really no way to even live as a single person, let alone raise a family.
Let alone have any money to be able to put back into the economy.
And Connecticut, in the meantime, went up, I believe, in September of this year to $11. So we're 50 cents behind Connecticut also.
And so what does it look for? What does the future look like for this campaign?
Well, we're not giving up, and part of our legislative agenda for next year will be an increase in the minimum wage. Our proposal for the immediate will be to request an increase in the minimum wage from $10.50 to $11.25 on July 1st of 2020, and then to go from $11.25 to $12 on January 1st of 2021, and then we have a plan out to get to a $15 an hour minimum wage, but we'll still be, because of this year of doing nothing, we'll still be at least a year to 2 years behind Connecticut and Massachusetts in getting there. But
it's a significant setback.
It's a setback.
Certainly.
And
we'll have workers migrating over the state border for sure.
Sure. For $90 a week, when you're a low-income worker, that's real money.
That is in some, at least 2 grocery trips.
Sure.
In some cases,
So
depending on the
10%
household
of your
size.
wage.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So that's on the agenda for 2020. We have a very ambitious agenda for 2020, as we always do.
And what's the next, another item for the future? So I know that there's work being done around the temporary caregivers insurance.
Yeah, we're going to, the temporary caregivers insurance program, which is under the TDI program, was established, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. It provides care, people pay into this program, because again, the employees pay into this, and so if there's a situation where there's an illness in your family, or a child is born, or other medical emergencies, you can call, under this program, you can take up to 4 weeks off. Our proposal is to extend it from 4 weeks to 6 weeks this year, and then from 6 weeks to 8 weeks the following year. Sometimes it's called parental leave, but in Rhode Island, this program has existed under the TDI. Well, this program has existed for 4 or 5 years, but the TDI program has been around for a long time. It's one of the best programs around and provides some real economic security for people. So that's a big fight.
I think it's important for people to know this is not like free money for people. They've contributed.
Yeah, it's their
It's their own money that
You
they're
start
putting
paying
in.
into it,
Right.
You start paying into it the minute you start working.
Yeah,
in Rhode
they
Island.
should call it maybe paid for parental
Yeah.
leave.
It's
Yeah.
your own funds that you've begun. All right, and how about I know that there's work being done around making sure domestic workers are included in the minimum wage, because from the beginning of time, they've been excluded, which does not make any sense to me,
So-
but do you want to talk about some of the work that's going to be done
Maureen.
Well,
this
we're
year?
just sort of wondering why it is they're exempt. These are folks who come into people's homes, oftentimes live at people's homes, and take care of either cooking or cleaning or child care, and yet they don't even receive minimum wage. So they receive no wage, actually. I mean, not no wage, but an undetermined wage. So
In some cases, as
Yeah.
we've found, it may be no wage.
yes, it
right?
might be no wage.
Well, Massachusetts several years ago passed what's called the Massachusetts Domestic
Yes.
Bill of Rights. And the Attorney General in Massachusetts just took legal action against 3 families in Saugus, Massachusetts, $495,000 in back wages. People were essentially being treated like indentured servitude, servants. And they were, $495,000 in back wages. So because they have the provision that says overtime pay and minimum wage, they were able to go in and say, wait a minute, you can't have people working 40 and 50 hours a week and paying them nothing. So, if people need these employees to do work for them, that's great, but they should pay them a fair wage and treat them justly.
I mean, it doesn't make sense that they're exempt. We're asking the employer to do the right thing, and we don't ask others to do that in any situation. We don't.
Right.
We have rules and regulations and laws because we don't just expect people
remember,
to do
they
the
were
right thing.
initially excluded, domestic workers were initially excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act back in 1935 when they passed the New Deal because of racism, because most
Absolutely.
domestic workers were black at that time.
It's
And
exactly
so
what it is.
That was the deal that they had to do to get the fair, under the Roosevelt administration. So there's a long history of this based on this kind of discrimination.
I mean, it's long overdue, and I'm looking forward to our coming segments when we can have a longer conversation around this
Sure,
too.
we
when
could
it
talk
comes
about
up.
what other kinds of wage violations are
Absolutely.
going on.
All right. And next is you're going to continue working on the DSP, the Direct Service Providers legislation, right?
Yes.
What does that look like? You'll just
I don't know the exact number, but we've been every year we've been advocating. We're not done yet.
No.
Until we get some real economic justice in this area.
for the individuals caring for
my
the most
judgment, these
vulnerable.
people should be making $20, $25 an hour.
Sure.
Never mind this
Yeah.
15. I mean, for what they do. And we're making up for lost ground as it is anyway. So
That's right.
from
As
that
George
perspective-
mentioned, they had kind of taken out a lot of money from the DD budget years ago, and we've been fighting it since, so we're not nearly caught up.
Right.
So it's going to be a long road.
I mean, individuals caring for our most vulnerable populations.
Absolutely.
They deserve
Exactly.
this. They deserve us to fight for them,
Right.
fight with them. And I know that there's another campaign coming up called the Raise the Bar campaign that SEIU is working on. I've been a little bit involved, at least in my community, because I definitely hold this campaign very dear to my heart, and the safe staffing. So do you guys want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, here's where we're kind of going back to the future. Rhode Island used to have staffing ratios in the nursing home industry, where depending on the severity of the patients, you had to have so many employees for so many patients. And it was written in law and it was written in regulation. Over a period of time, again, into this whole world of let's let the companies do whatever they want and let's have no regulation, those things were relaxed and are right now non-existent. We're the only state in New England that doesn't have some sort of a ratio, either through law or regulation. So the SEIU and a group of community partners started this campaign to raise the bar to reinstate, through regulation or statute, some sort of a ratio where, you know, again, it's for the benefit of the patients and the benefit of the employees.
Right.
I started my organizing career back in the early 70s, organizing nursing homes. And that was an issue, a big issue then. We actually had language in our contracts that said when somebody was out, the workers who took up that person's patients took that patient, the workers who were out salary, and split it among themselves. So if you're supposed to have 4 people on that ward or on that wing, and 3 showed up, you took that 4th person's pay and you gave it to the other workers. So you've got to have some penalty in there, because otherwise the employer doesn't care that much when somebody is taking the time off.
Right.
And it's harder to recruit people if it's always short staffing. So you've got to have some protection for both the worker and for the patients and the patient's family. So this will be a great campaign.
Yeah.
It will be, and I think SEIU understands fully that as much as this has to do with their members, it was the members who are concerned about the patient safety.
Right.
With not having enough people there to care for it.
And the community forum, the community discussion that I went to around this campaign, it was so clear that the staff know that they're at risk as well, and the members know that this is for the safety of not only the patients but themselves, right? A woman was talking to us about their employers, so the nursing home, the nursing facilities, they know that it's important to have a large number of staff on at a certain time, because when they come in to see and make sure they have the right number of staff.
Oh yeah, sure.
That's when they overstaff. So that's when they have not overstaffed. They put the correct number of
correct
staff there,
right.
so they know
They
what
know
the right thing is to do.
Right.
Oh, sure, sure.
Okay.
I was
you
just
wanna-
going to say,
yeah.
and anyone who has dealt with anybody in a nursing home, as I did with my mother, and recently with a friend who had to be in a rehabilitation center, can see the impact of the staffing
Absolutely.
ratio. It's
Right.
incredible.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, day to day.
All right, now before we wrap up, I know an op-ed went out around employers who have a certain number of employees who are on Medicaid
right.
rather than their health insurance. You want to talk a little bit about this piece?
Yeah, we were involved in that campaign a little bit last year. The governor put a proposal in her budget, which unfortunately did not pass, which would have created a fine per employee that's on Medicaid when the when they should be on the employer's health insurance program. So we took that issue up. We did an op-ed with I did an op-ed with Pat Quinn and Nancy Idealuca from the Unite Here. We're getting some reaction to it already, which is good. And essentially what we want to do is see that these employers meet their responsibilities and make sure that people that are working for them are on their health insurance plan. And not on Medicaid, which is costing the state a lot of money. So there's some ideas being formulated right now, so we'll be working on that. And
Absolutely.
I guess in closing, I think it's always important, we always think it's important to remind people that the labor movement is the people's lobby.
Yep.
You know, we lobby on issues that are important for all working people, not just union members. And whether it's the minimum wage or an issue like this, the Medicaid, the support for the direct service personnel. In that situation, all of the other workers, whether they were union or non-union, also benefited and their families benefited. So, you know, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that if there isn't a strong labor movement, a lot of these rules, regulations, standards won't exist for any worker. So
Absolutely.
the people's lobby is on the job.
Well,
All workers count.
Absolutely. Thank you guys both so much for joining us. I know you're both very busy, but I look forward to hearing more about
Never
a lot
too
of
busy
this
for
information.
Labor Vision.
Good.
Thank
I'm
you,
glad
Erica.
to hear. All right. In wrapping up, thank you everyone for watching. Those of you who are just tuning in, make sure to check out this episode of Labor Vision on our YouTube channel. It's Labor Vision TV 1. Thank you so much for joining us. You're watching Labor Vision. We hope to see you back here next week. Have a great night.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.